Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to delve deeper into the philosophical underpinnings of practical implications of the concept outlined in the title Museveninomics and Kainerugabarisim, the Avengers ethos for Kainerugabarisim, Museveninomics, and Tova dispensation towards Kagweta's astute Ugandanized fundamental change versus the Red People Power Ghettology in Uganda in light of Jaja, Tova. Listen, my name is Isaac Christopher Lubogo. Welcome to Sui Generis, where we demystify philosophical and legal aspects. So at its core, the juxtaposition of these ideologies represent the clash of paradigms, a struggle between the forces of continuity and change, tradition and innovation. So in order to understand Museveninomics and Kainerugabarisim, we need to embody as a philosophy in terms of stability and continuity, rooted in the principles of leadership and the governance championed by His Excellency President Yoweri Kaguta Museveni and his allies. So these ideologies will emphasize the importance of hierarchy, discipline, and loyalty, drawing upon Uganda's historical and cultural heritage to legitimize the authority and perpetuate thereof. Conversely, the Red People Power and Bobi Ghettology represent a grassroots movement for change and reform, driven by a desire for democracy, accountability, and social justice. So these ideologies challenge the status quo, questioning the legitimacy of entrenched power structures and advocating for a more inclusive and equitable Uganda. They draw inspiration from global movements for human rights and for social justice, leveraging what they call social media and grassroots organizations to mobilize support and amplify their message. Listen, my friends, in the realm of economics, Kainerugabarisim and Museveninomics reflect what we call a commitment to economic development and self-reliance, emphasizing the importance of entrepreneurship, innovation, and investment. So even as we engage in this debate, we need to recognize one thing, that these ideologies prioritize job creation, infrastructure development, and poverty reduction, aiming to improve the standard of living and enhance the economic well-being of all Ugandans. They draw upon the principles of what they call neoliberal economics, advocating for deregulation, privatization, and free market policies to stimulate economic growth and attract foreign investment. Ladies and gentlemen, once again, I would like to continue this debate by giving a contrast of sorts in terms of understanding what they call Tigray dispensation, which calls for comprehensive reform and progress across all sectors of Ugandan society. It emphasizes the need for good governance, accountability, and transparency, fostering an environmental conducive to what they call sustainable development and social harmony. So the idea is that this ideology draws inspiration from Uganda's history in terms of struggle and resilience, and invoking the spirit of liberation and independence to mobilize support for meaningful change. Ladies and gentlemen, even as we continue our debate, please understand that these practical examples in terms of these ideologies in action can be seen in Uganda's political change landscape, where the ruling national resistance movement, as we know it today, government, as we know it today, has actually implemented policies and initiatives aligned with Museveninomics and Kainerugabarisim, such as the promotion of rural development, things to do with infrastructure investment, and the security sector reform. Meanwhile, the opposition, led by figures like Bobi, has actually mobilized support in terms of round issues of governance, in terms of human rights, and in terms of what they call social justice, challenging the NRM's monopoly on the power and advocating for accountability and transparency. My friends, even as we engage in this kind of philosophical debate, please understand that my intention is to innuate some kind of intellectual debates within your mind, so that I can encourage ourselves to think outside the box. Not only think outside the box, but also throw the box away. Now, the clash of ideologies outlined in the title reflects the complex and dynamic nature of Uganda's political, economic, and social landscape. So as a country, we grapple with challenges and opportunities in terms of presenting the challenges of today. But it is essential, my friends, to engage in thoughtful dialogue, reflection, and action to chart a path towards and uphold the values of unity, progress, and justice for all Ugandans. Now, let us try to comprehend the argument in terms of what they call the MK movement, in terms of Alliance Patriotic League of Uganda. The argument here should be blended with aspect of the Avengers ethos, in terms of how the ethos has actually applied in terms of Ghettology, Museveninomics, and Kainerugabarisim, in terms of a dispensation towards convergence as to Ugandanized fundamental change. Obviously, bearing it or measuring it against Red People Power movement of Ghettology in terms of Uganda, of Jaja, Tova, Remain. Now, the inclusion of the so-called MK movement, Alliance Patriotic League of Uganda, aids another layer in terms of complicity to the discussion. Now, this movement, often associated with the legacy of His Excellency President Museveni and his allies, embodies, as I said, a philosophy of patriotism, loyalty, and national unity. It represents a formidable force in Ugandan politics, drawing upon the principles of Museveninomics and Kainerugabarisim in order to maintain stability and continuity in terms of governance. The argument I'm proponing here is that there has to be a nexus in terms of the present government, in terms of its continuity, in terms of the probable challenges that Uganda is facing today. That's why I'm arguing it in terms of what they call the Avengers ethos, within the context, in terms of symbolizing a collective strength, a resilience of sorts. The Patriotic League of Uganda is akin to a legendary superhero team that reflects the commitment of unity, discipline, and determination in the face of challenges, drawing upon diverse talents and capabilities in terms of the members, in terms of achieving common goals and also objectives. My friends, this is business that we need to comprehend. So if we are to continue to argue in terms of Ghettology and Museveninomics, in terms of the representation of economic ideologies that prioritize, for example, economic growth, development, and self-reliance, aligned with the principles of Patriotic League of Uganda, and also understanding these ideological dispensations in terms of emphasizing the importance of entrepreneurship, and also investment, and also in terms of infrastructure, and also in terms of driving economic progress, and in terms of improving the livelihoods of the ordinary Ugandans, then the debate is at your forefront. The argument is, do these philosophies, do these ideologies serve the purpose that Ugandans would like to enjoy? If I were to argue in terms of Kainerugabarisim as a dispensation, it remains as a call for comprehensive reform and progress across all sectors of Ugandan society, reflecting obviously a commitment in terms of what the Patriotic League of Uganda intends to do for purposes of governance, in terms of accountability, in terms of transparency, underscoring the need for inclusive and participatory decision-making processes that empower citizens and foster what they call social cohesion and harmony. These are the things that we're talking about in terms of understanding the comprehension of the debate that I'm presenting before us. Now listen, Red People Power and the so-called Bobi and Ghettology represent a counterforce to this Patriotic League of Uganda. It is intended to advocate for a change and reform in terms of governance and politics. Now, these ideologies draw upon principles of democracy, accountability, and social justice, or at least they should actually draw upon the principles of democracy, accountability, and social justice, challenging the status quo and advocating for greater representation and participation in Ugandan politics. And that is the question of the day. Now, when we measure that, as I said, in light of Jaja, Tova, Remain, it should be significant as a call in terms of wisdom, a reflection in terms of old age, which should be a replica of age has it all, in terms of an imperative that Uganda should engage in thoughtful dialogue and debate to chart a path forward in terms of upholding the values of unity, progress, and also a call for justice. So as a country, we need to navigate these complexities in terms of political, economic, and social landscape. So it is essential to foster a spirit of inclusivity, dialogue, and cooperation in order to address the challenges and opportunities of the present moment. In the contemporary Uganda, my friend, the landscape is adorned with multifaceted ideologies and movements, so each bearing profound implications in terms of the nation's trajectory. So if you argue Museveninomics and Kainerugabarisim MK movement, Alliance Patriotic League of Uganda, it should escalate a narrative in terms of continuity, in terms of unity, in terms of national identity. And it should draw upon the legacies of His Excellency President Museveni and his allies in order to navigate the current of progression in terms of governance. Now listen, my friend, Within this framework, the Avengers ethos, as I told you, my historiology comes to the aspect, he who avenges, emerges as a testament of collective strength and resiliency, akin to what some people argue in terms of what they call a superhero team, as I say, and it embodies a spirit of unity, determination, relying the members of the Patriotic League of Uganda towards common objective rooted in patriotism and reality. I'm trying to create an ideology for the kind of governance that we have as a nation. And perhaps if it comes out good, maybe Uganda can be a benchmark in terms of underscoring some of these ideologies for export to other jurisdictions. So in the realm of economics, Eurynomics, Museveninomics represents pillars of economic aim policy in terms of fostering growth, development, and self-reliance. So these ideologies echo the ethos of what they call Patriotic League of Uganda, as I said, emphasizing entrepreneurship, investment, and infrastructure as a catalyst for progress and prosperity. Meanwhile, without a shadow of doubt, the argument in terms of tribalism as a dispensation heralds a call of comprehensive reform and progress, advocating nonetheless for good governance, accountability, transparency across all sectors of society. It embodies the spirit of renewal, transformation, underpinning the aspirations of what Patriotic League of Uganda calls for in terms of a better future. And these are the debates that we're talking about in terms of comprehending and understanding. Now, when you juxtapose that with Red People Power or the Bobi Wine Ghettology ideology, it should symbolize a beginning as a movement in terms of change, in terms of reform, in terms of aspirations driven for democracy, accountability, and social justice. So the question before you and I is, do these ideologies represent the true feelings and aspirations of the people in terms of Vox Populi, Vox Dei, or in terms of Solus Populi, Solus Suprema? The voice of God, the voice of the people is the voice of God, and the welfare of the people should be supreme. This ideology should challenge the prevailing order, advocating for greater inclusivity in terms of representation of all Ugandans in the political dilemma. Amidst these competing narratives, as I say, this argument of Jaja, Tova, beckons us to pause and reflect, invoking a spirit of wisdom and introspection. It urges Ugandans to engage in meaningful dialogue and debate, transcending partisan divides to chart a collective path towards upholding unity, progress, and justice. Listen, as Uganda navigates the complexities of this socio-political landscape, it is imperative, my friends, to understand and embrace the diversity of thought and perspective, recognizing, as I say, the richness and complexity in terms of the nation's identity. So by fostering a culture of inclusivity, in terms of dialogue, in terms of cooperation, there is no doubt that Uganda can forge a future that honors the aspirations and dreams of all its citizens. And that's the debate that I'm trying to examine for you here. Let me continue by just trying to shed some little light in terms of how these ideologies of past Ugandan leaders relate to current landscapes in terms of an intersection with the ideologies outlined above. Listen, we've had a lot of challenges in terms of past leaders. I'll begin by trying to, not even going with the older ones, but let me begin with His Excellency, the VCE, Idi Amin Dada. Remember the arguments of Idi Amin Dada. Idi Amin Dada, Amin's regime was basically characterized by authoritarianism, not so, human rights abuses and economic mismanagement, so they tell us. Now his ideology revolved around militarism, nationalism, and anti-imperialism, with a focus on consolidating power and suppressing dissent. If you argue His Excellency Dr. Milton Obote, his argument is Obote's leadership was actually marked by a mix of socialism, not so, an aspect of Pan-Africanism and authoritarianism of sort. His ideology emphasized state intervention in the economy, nationalization with key industries, and also centralization of power. Now, one thing that stands out in Apollo Milton Obote II, for example, during his second presidency, Obote continued to promote socialist policies and centralized power, but faced increasing opposition and ultimately was ousted in a military coup. Not so. Now, let's bring these arguments in terms of contemporary debates that I'm talking about today. When you interplay with the current ideology, Amin's legacy, Amin's authoritarian and militaristic approach contrasts sharply with democratic aspirations in terms of movements like the Red People Power, Ghettology, and his regimes in terms of legacy of human rights abuse, in terms of the abuses, served as a cautionary tale against the concentration of power and the suppression of dissent. That is something you must comprehend again from the word go. Now, if you are to argue in terms of Obote's legacy, Obote as a socialist in terms of his policies and centralization of power resonate with the elements of Chibuharism, not so in terms of the dispensation, which calls for comprehensive reform and progress. However, his authoritarian tendencies also serve as a reminder of the dangers of unchecked exclusive or executive authority, and that was something that you need to comprehend. Now, when you contrast this with present leaders, you need to understand that President Museveni, for example, in terms of Museveni's pseudo-ideologies, such as Muhozology or even Kainerugabarisim, emphasize continued stability, continuity, and national identity, and therefore drawing upon Uganda's historical and cultural heritage. Unlike Amin or Obote, Museveni has actually prioritized economic liberalization and market-oriented policies, aligning with Kainerugabarisim and Museveninomics dispensations. Okay, now let's argue Bobi Wine in terms of the Red People Power movement, in terms of representation as a departure from the ideologies of past leaders advocating for democracy, for example, or accountability, for example, and social justice. His emphasis, for example, on grassroots mobilization and inclusivity contrasts with what they call the central power structure of Amin and Obote. Not so. And that's something you must comprehend from the word go. So these arguments that I'm trying to propose create a debate in terms of understanding the past vis-a-vis the present. Now, when you look for standout examples, if you're looking for standout examples, Chibuharism as a dispensation versus Obote's centralization. Chibuharism as a dispensation echoes Obote's call for reform and progress, but emphasizes decentralization, accountability, and transparency. So unlike Obote's decentralization of power, Chibuharism advocates for devolving authority in terms of local communities and strengthening democratic institutions. That is something you cannot take away. If you're to argue the Avengers' efforts vis-a-vis Amin's authoritarianism, the Avengers' efforts embodies a spirit of unity and collaborating it in terms of contrasting it with Amin's authoritarianism and divisive leadership style. So while Amin ruled through fear and intimidation, the Avengers' efforts promotes cooperation and solidarity among diverse groups. And that is something, again, you cannot take away from them. Not so. Now, the ideologies of the past leaders provide what they call valuable context of understanding the present political landscape. By examining their legacies and contrasting them with these current ideologies, we can gain insight into the evolving dynamic governance and political thoughts in Uganda. Listen, as I make a substantive conclusion in terms of the debate that I'm trying to propose today, let me, for example, further explore somehow how these ideologies of past, especially these past Ugandan leaders, intersect with those of present leadership in terms of, the dispensations, and how they have influenced contemporary political disclosures in terms of action. Not so. Now, if I'm to debate in terms of that contextualization, let's look at, again, Idi Amin Dada's legacy, as a legacy. Amin's regime left a lasting legacy of authoritarianism and substantive human rights abuses and economic instability. Now, his militaristic approach and centralized control over power serve as a cautionary example of the dangers of what they call unchecked executive authority. Now, when you contrast that with present leaders, Amin's authoritarian tendencies stand as a stark contrast to the democratic aspirations of movements like Red People Power, Bobi Wine's Ghettology. While Amin wielded power through fear and intimidation, Bobi Wine's movement, on the other hand, is advocating for some kind of transparency and some kind of accountability and inclusivity in terms of governance. Not so. And that's something you must comprehend from the word go. Listen, if I'm to develop that a little bit higher in terms of the dispensation, when you argue Milton Obote's legacy, for example, Obote's leadership was characterized by socialist policies, as I told, centralization of power, and a state of intervention in terms of the economy. His regime emphasized nationalization and key industries and authoritarian control, leading to political instability and economic decline. Not so. Now, if you have to contrast that with the present leaders, Obote's socialist ideology, for example, contrast with the market-oriented policies of President Yoweri Kabuta's administration. So when you align this with Kainerugabarisim and Museveninomics dispensation, Museveni's emphasis on economic liberalization and privatization reflects a departure from Obote's static approach to economic management. And that is something you must comprehend again from the word go. So I'm trying to make a blend in terms of the comparative analysis with the present vis-a-vis the past. So when I interplay again with the present leaders of movements, Museveni's continuity with past leaders, Museveni, in terms of ideology, such as the new ideologies now that are proponed by Museveniology and Kainerugabarisim, share some similarities with some kind of authoritarian tendencies of past leaders, like Amin and Obote. However, Museveni's emphasis on stability, continuity, and national identity also reflect a departure from the chaotic regimes of his predecessors. So, please understand that. Now, Bobi Wine's challenge to past ideologies in terms of Bobi Wine Red Power People movement represents a break from the legacies of the past leaders advocating for advocacy, accountability, and social justice. And argumentatively, there are those who argue that his emphasis on grassroots mobilization from this idea of ghetto, okay, and people-centered governance contrasts with centralized power structures of Amin and Obote. And that is something, again, you must comprehend, again, from the word go. Listen, if you are to argue in terms of standout examples, I'm going to give some standout examples so that you comprehend where we are coming from. If you are to argue Chivihawirism, dispensation, and Obote's centralization, Chivihawirism advocates for what they call comprehensive reform and progress, echoing Obote's calls for centralized control. However, unlike Obote's, top-down approach governance, Chivihawirism basically emphasized decentralization, accountability, and transparency, reflecting more inclusive and participatory vision for Uganda's future. Listen, the Avengers ethos and Amin's authoritarianism also should come into play. The Avengers ethos embodies the spirit of unity in terms of collaboration, in terms of resiliency, standing as a staff to contrast Amin's divisive and authoritarian leadership style. While Amin ruled through fear, as I said, and intimidation, the Avengers ethos promoted cooperation and solidarity among diverse groups, reflecting more inclusive, participatory, approach in terms of governance. And that is something, again, you cannot take away. So when you argue this debate, you must comprehend them in terms of the past vis-a-vis the present. So the concept of my argument here is that the ideology of the past Ugandan leaders continue, no doubt, to influence contemporary political discourse in terms of action, providing valuable insights into dynamic governance and political thought in terms of our country, Uganda. So by examining these legacies and contrasting them with the present leaders in terms of the movements that we see, we can gain deeper understanding of the evolving political landscape. And this would help you and I to comprehend and tackle the challenges and also have opportunities in terms of presenting a future for Uganda. So this is something we need to comprehend again from the word go. Listen, my friends, I'm going to just make a conclusion in terms of comprehending what Idi Amin's and legacy would mean. Now, if you're arguing Amin's authoritarian regime, it left a deep scar on Uganda's political history, characterized obviously by human rights abuses and ethnic tensions and economic mismanagement. His rule was actually marked by centralized control, repression and dissent and violent crackdowns on opposition. And that is something you must comprehend from the word go. When you contrast that with the present leaders, the authoritarian legacy of Amin stands in stark contrast with democratic aspirations championed by movements like the Red People Farm Ghettology argument. So while Amin, ruled through fear and coercion, Bobi Wine's movement can be argued in terms of advocating for transparency, accountability, and respect for human rights as a question of debate. These aspects should be important for you to comprehend even as we argue and comprehend some of these legacies. Now, let's argue Milton Obote's legacy a little bit in terms of a conclusion. Now, as I said, Milton Obote's socialist lining regime promotes state intervention in terms of economy, in terms of nationalization, in terms of key industries, in terms of centralization of power. His rule was marked by political repression, human rights violations, and also economic stagnation. And that is something, again, that was a big lacuna in terms of that. If you contrast that with present leaders, Obote's static approach to governance definitely contrasted with the market policies, oriented policies, vis-a-vis what is happening in terms of President Museveni's administration, aligned in terms of Kainerugabarisim and Museveninomics dispensation, which Museveni argument emphasizes economic liberalization and privatization, representing again a departure from Obote's socialist model. And that is something, again, you cannot take away in terms of the debate. My friends, I would love to go on and on in terms of making this argument, but consider this as section of voice number 2 in terms of trying to demystify the components of Museveninomics, Yorunomics, and all the debates that we've been having. But you can find most of our books at lubogo.org or sugeneslawup.com. We're coming up with super books in terms of these ideologies, comprehending Museveninomics, Kainerugabarisim, and then Ghettology. So please be blessed. Once again, my name is Isaac Christopher Lubogo. Blessings and thank you for your attention. God bless you.